So I feel like it's a pattern. Every week Netflix comes out with a new sci-fi movie. Critics hate it. I either love it or at least defend it. Now, this one isn't going to be a love, it's going to be a defend. Now, it's called Anon. It's by the same guy, the director who did Gattaca. So he's not a scrub. He's got some sci-fi chops. Specifically, this one wasn't a great movie, but it did a lot of things right. So I'm not going to talk about the plot. The plot's very simple. A bunch of detectives are trying to track down the serial killer. One of the detectives becomes very involved with this killer. So simple plot. What's interesting is the setting. So it's set in the future where everyone has this retinal implant that you still walk around like normal. It's not virtual reality where you stay home living in a fake world. No, you're walking around in the real world seeing things, but this implant will pipe in information that's overlaid on top of what you're seeing. So a lot of examples are, you might walk by a store with a bunch of watches, and immediately you'll see information, pricing, and a bunch of other information about these watches, and you can have advertisements that are targeted to different people. So it's fascinating. If you've never bought a watch in your life, you might walk by the watch store and nothing pops up, but someone who, because the company has data that this person has bought watches before, that person, when they walk by, they're going to get a targeted advertisement where specific information relevant to them is going to pop up. You can also see people's names. You can see how much people make. So it's very interesting as you walk around. For us, it's very disorienting. You think it's overwhelming seeing all this information, but potentially if something like this was slowly phased in, maybe eventually, gradually, you wouldn't find it so jarring and off-putting to be walking around and taking in all this additional information. Also, what's fascinating is, let's say you had your house and you really wanted a painting on the wall, and you had this painting that you loved and you couldn't afford to get the real physical painting, but you could just put something into your software, into your hardware software, to overlay the painting onto the wall there. So whenever you looked at the painting, you saw it. And potentially the software could get so powerful that someone else would look at it and they might see the painting as well. So if everyone who looked at that wall, because of the little thing in their eye, was able to see that painting hanging there on the wall, would it matter that the painting wasn't actually there? And what I loved was how the visual style really matched the themes that this movie was exploring. So it had a distinct look. Everything was very gray, very overcast, a lot of smoky granite, very classy, elegant, and very monotone. Very monochromatic, and you could look at this two ways. One, if everyone was able to overlay their own information onto a setting, you could potentially have a situation where you have a family living together, and the living room, when each family member is having dinner or lunch, the living room looks completely different for the different people because each person is going to have their own visual style that they want to live in. So rather than creating 3 different houses or just different rooms in the house, you just have one basic style. That's kind of the baseline, the bare bones, and then everyone else is putting their own stuff that only they're able to see maybe on top of that. So just the idea of everyone living in these different realities, again, we see it a lot on the internet now with news feeds being tailored to each person, but fascinating to think of it occurring in the real world. And at first it seemed like it was just kind of ripping off noir. It seemed like you had the hard-drinking, hard-smoking detective, haunted by the past, intrigued by this mysterious femme fatale, but I think that the setting in this kind of overcast, dark setting, it was more to show that maybe this world, there really was less crime and probably a lot more efficiency in this world, and technically maybe this world was better, but there was a kind of sadness, a kind of malaise, a kind of lack of individuality, a kind of lack of warmth, and I wouldn't really want to live in this world. And I thought that was maybe more effective. Sometimes they could have had a movie about the dangers of lack of privacy, and you have people knocking on your door at 2 a.m. and dragging you to jail, and that's certainly a potential problem with surveillance, but this showed a more subtle problem where, yeah, maybe it wouldn't be a complete dystopia from first glance. Maybe it would seem like, yeah, there is less crime, and in some sense it does seem like a utopia, but there's something wrong. There's a lack of individuality and certain visual elements, everyone wearing the charcoal gray suits, sitting around the same tables. There was this sense of sameness and lack of individuality that I thought it conveyed well. So all these visual elements, the skyscrapers, the apartment buildings, everything just contributed to the sense of uniformity, and that was scary. But what was even more scary is the sense that if someone else was able to have direct control over your visual feed, how terrifying that is. So already when you get the sense that if someone's very charismatic and very good with words, there's that kind of fear that they're able to control your perception. Here it's literal, where you had someone who was a killer and they were actually able to take over your vision and show you what you were looking at was actually what they were seeing, which was them pointing a gun at you, and you were suddenly seeing yourself terrified with a gun pointed at you. So very unsettling, and you see the hallucinations that people were able to pump into each other's visual feed. So just this idea of, again, it's kind of a metaphorical idea of someone being able to control your perception. We find that unsettling. Seeing it made literal here was terrifying. And it's interesting how we see the ability to augment reality like this and to overlay this stuff on top of reality, which in some sense can make reality much more interesting and fun. That also opens the door for you to have your perceptions be seriously flawed and wrong. So you see how the two, there's an advantage and there's a disadvantage to it. And Black Mirror touched on this with an episode. Now this movie Black Mirror had a whole episode about it. This just touched on it, where when you have everyone recording, and that's another part of this visual technology, that everyone's recording their surroundings at all time, everyone potentially becomes a perfect eyewitness to a crime. And this movie didn't really flesh that out too much, but it was interesting to think about how you no longer, one, have to rely on people's testimonies and what they believe they saw. You can actually just look at what they actually saw, and how that opens the door for criminals to potentially have way more incentive to kill any witnesses to a crime. And then quick overview of the issue of privacy, because privacy does allow for people to do a lot more negative things, whether you're a low-level kind of criminal or just bad person, whether you're a troll or a really negative hacker, or you're at the top, upper echelon of society, and you're the people who have the most power in controlling the way things run, and you're not the person who's the president or someone who's a figurehead. No, you're behind the scenes operating with so much more power because no one knows who you are. So either way, whatever level of crappy person you are, having more anonymity usually allows you to influence things and manipulate things even better. So privacy definitely has its downside. So why is it important? Because for one, you might think, there's an argument, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. So if you say, well, I don't do any weird things online, I don't do anything that I'm ashamed of, so why do I care about privacy? Well, you don't have anything you've done your whole life. You've never had any kind of weird sexual fetish. You've never had anything you said in anger, a really nasty thing that, if taken out of context, paints you in a pretty bad light. You never went through a phase, some kind of weird phase where you're involved in something that now you look back and regret. Most people looking back have something that they wouldn't want to get out and can be potentially used against them. So if you have anybody in power, some kind of government that has information on everybody, they can basically be selective, and anyone who challenges their power and anyone who's a threat to them, then they leak stuff about that person and they blackmail that person. So when you have dirt on everybody, that's the best situation to be in. And the best thing for a dystopian government is to have a situation where everybody in the society is potentially breaking the law in some way, because then who goes to jail and who goes to court, they have complete control over that, and they can just do it selectively to all their enemies. Another problem with privacy, there's the issue of prejudging. So if someone comes up and asks you for directions, and if, like in the case of this future society, you can immediately see how much money they make a year. Well, if someone comes up and they don't make so much, you might say, yeah, I don't know, go ask someone else. Someone comes up to you and makes a lot, you might be much more inclined to help them. And really, how much money you make per year, that should have no bearing on just basic human decency and getting directions to where you want to go. So it really increases the amount of just these heuristics we can use in these snap judgments, rather than really getting to know people and treating people honestly to some kind of extent. The more information you're able to immediately know, it's easy for you to prejudge and kind of discriminate. Now, last thing I'll mention, I should have mentioned this before, Clive Owen is the detective and the killer. Not a twist, it's Amanda. I thought it was Seyfried, but I heard Seyfried. They're the two leads. They're quite good, but I really think Nicolas Cage could have been, maybe no one will know what I mean by that, but I think that Nicolas Cage, not manic Nicolas Cage, but more restrained, haunted Nicolas Cage could have done great in this role. And then I did want to mention the ending, so it's not really a spoiler, but I will mention what the final quote that ends the movie is. She says, it's not that I have anything to hide, I just have nothing that I want to show you. And that seemed to me like it was kind of snarky and kind of immature, and kind of like something a teenager would say who hasn't really grown up. So I didn't love that line. I didn't think it was very profound. I didn't think it was anything deep. It just sounded kind of, like I say, snarky. And I wish they went a different direction with what should have been really grounding all these themes that I think it was trying to explore. So I thought it wasn't a great way to end it. But nonetheless, there was a lot of good in this movie. Just a few mistakes here or there that kept it from being great.